Somewhere between the day you just lived and the sleep waiting to take you, there is a frequency. You won't find it on any dial. It doesn't broadcast on a schedule. It comes when the hour is late and the lights are low, and you are ready to go somewhere without leaving where you are. This is the midnight frequency. What follows are radio dramas, some set in the smoky, rain-soaked world of the old golden age, where private detectives walked dark streets and every shadow had a secret. Some take place closer to now, some venture further out, into times and places that haven't happened yet. All of them are original stories, written in the spirit of the programs that once kept the whole country listening in the dark. From this moment forward, there are no interruptions, no commercials, nothing to pull you back. If you found something here worth returning to, we'd be grateful for your support. The details are in the show notes, but that's for later. Right now, there is only the story. Get comfortable. Let it come.
The last 3 days were the longest of the mission. John had spent 211 days on the Orion before the signal arrived, and those days had passed with the particular quality of deep survey time, which was not slow exactly, but was not fast either. More like a steady current that carried you along without requiring you to notice its motion. The days after the signal had been different, dense with work and attention, each one compressing the way days compressed when you were engaged completely with something that mattered. But the last 3 days were different from both of those. They had the density of the contact period and the weight of something else underneath, the specific weight of imminence, the feeling of standing at the edge of a thing you have been walking toward for a long time and being able to see the edge clearly for the first time. The curriculum continued through those 3 days, and the fact that it continued was itself a source of a particular kind of comfort. The signal was familiar now. 40 days of it had given the crew a relationship with its texture, with the pace and structure of its transmissions, and in the hours when the approaching vessel was visible to the passive sensors as a growing point of light, and the distance was a number that decreased visibly between observations. The ongoing signal was the thing that felt most like a handhold. What the curriculum was doing in those final days was the thing Okafor had been anticipating since she understood the biology layer's structure, and when it arrived, she recognized it immediately. The word she used was cognition. Not cognition in the philosophical sense, not consciousness or awareness or any of the concepts that carried so much human freight that they could not be exported across biological boundaries without losing their shape. Cognition in the functional sense. The way a mind took in information from its environment. The mechanisms by which a living system processed the difference between what was there and what was not there, between signal and noise, at the level of individual perception. The curriculum described sensory systems, not human sensory systems, not any specific sensory system at all, but the abstract category of sensory processing, the way any organism that interacted with its physical environment needed some mechanism for detecting physical states and translating them into internal representations. It built this concept from the biochemistry layer, particularly from the molecular structures described as central to information. Processing in the fourth biological profile, the aquatic one. The connection between the biochemistry of perception and the abstract concept of perceiving was drawn carefully and over several hours of transmission. And when Torres had extracted and mapped the full structure of the argument, she said, with the flat precision she used for things she found genuinely remarkable, that it was the most elegant piece of scientific pedagogy she had ever encountered. They're describing what it means to have senses, Okafor said, without being able to assume we share any specific ones. They can't know if we see or hear, or if our primary sensory modality is something they haven't encountered. So they're describing the concept at the level of information theory. A sensory system is any mechanism that reduces uncertainty about the state of the environment. That's true regardless of whether the mechanism is an eye or an ear, or something with no human equivalent. It's also a description of what John does for a living, Torres said, which was unusual enough coming from Torres that the room was briefly lighter for it. The cognition layer moved faster than any previous layer. The curriculum had been accelerating since the first bilateral exchange, calibrating upward with each demonstrated comprehension, and by day 39 it was moving at a pace that kept Okafor and Torres working in parallel rather than in sequence. Two streams of analysis running simultaneously and converging periodically when an element required both of their frameworks to interpret. The concept the cognition layer was building toward was something that Okafor named on the morning of day 40 with a precision that John thought was one of the best single sentences he had heard in his professional life. "They're describing the concept of a model," she said. "A mind is a system that builds models of things outside itself. And communication is what happens when two minds exchange models." She said this while looking at the display, not at him or Torres, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That's what this whole curriculum has been. Not a lesson in mathematics, a model. A model of what they are and how they think, built in the only material that any two minds anywhere might share, and offered to us so we could build a model of them before we met them, so that the meeting would not be between two things that were completely opaque to each other." On the afternoon of day 40, the passive sensors showed the approaching vessel at a distance of 3 light hours, close enough that the imaging array could resolve it as a shape rather than a point. Torres ran the imaging data through enhancement processing for 2 hours and then put the result on the main display, and the comms bay went very quiet. It was not a human shape. It was not a shape that bore any obvious relationship to any engineering aesthetic John had encountered in his career. But it was clearly a made thing. The unmistakable quality of deliberately arranged structure, of components assembled with purpose, visible even through the limits of the imaging resolution. It was large in the way the displacement estimate had suggested, long along one axis and irregular in cross-section, with what appeared to be clusters of structure at intervals that Torres said might correspond to the 4 atmospheric zones they had identified from the thermal data. "It's beautiful," said Dr. Mbeki, who was standing behind Torres looking at the display. No one disagreed with her, though John thought the word beautiful was doing a lot of work in a situation where most of the available vocabulary was inadequate. It was not beautiful the way a landscape was beautiful or a piece of music was beautiful. It was beautiful the way a proof was beautiful, the way an elegant solution to a hard problem was beautiful. Beautiful in the specific register of something that accomplished exactly what it needed to accomplish, without anything wasted. The signal was still running through all of this. The cognition layer had given way in the final hours to something that Okafor was calling the exchange layer, a section of the curriculum that dealt with the concept of intentional communication, of the difference between information transfer as a passive physical process and information transfer as a deliberate act between minds that were each modeling the other. It was, she said, the final scaffolding. After this layer, the curriculum would have built everything it needed to build to begin saying things that were not mathematics. The close approach happened at 1400 hours ship time on day 41. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way the curriculum had happened, in stages, each one announced by a change in the data before it was visible in any direct way. Torres called out the distance at intervals as the final hours closed. 12 light minutes, 8, 4, 2. The deceleration was holding exactly to the profile they had projected, which John noted to himself as a detail that was either obvious or meaningful, that whatever was operating the vessel was doing exactly what they had indicated they would do from a distance of 40 days, and was continuing to do it as the distance closed, which was one definition of a kept promise. At 45 minutes out, the signal changed. Not abruptly. The exchange layer had been completing its final sections over the previous hours, and what replaced it was not a new curriculum layer, but something that did not fit the layer structure at all. It was shorter than any curriculum section had been. It was structured differently, more compressed, using the full vocabulary of the shared language in a way that the curriculum had been building toward but had not yet deployed. The way a student who has spent a semester learning grammar suddenly uses all of it at once in a single spoken sentence. Okafor read it twice before she said anything. "It's a greeting," she said. "Not a mathematical greeting, an actual greeting. Using the exchange layers framework for intentional communication, using the self-reference markers for both vessels, using the temporal notation and the biological markers and the contact marker from the very first response." She paused. "It's saying, in the most precise terms currently available to both of us, we are here, you are there, we know you, we are glad of the distance that is no longer between us." The comms bay held 7 people by then, the full crew except Ito, who was at the navigation station and connected by intercom. No one said anything for a moment. "We need to respond," John said. Okafor was already building the response. She had been building it in some form since day 31, adding to it and revising it each time the shared vocabulary expanded, and what she sent 11 minutes later was the Orion's own greeting, its own use of everything they had built together, its own statement of presence and recognition and the particular quality of the distance that was no longer between them. The round-trip time at close approach was 4 minutes and change. The response to their response came at 4 minutes and 23 seconds, and it was brief, and Torres parsed its mathematical structure in under a minute, and Okafor read its linguistic content in under 2. And when she looked up from the display, her expression was the one John had never seen on her before, the one that existed past the boundary of what professional composure could contain. "They said something I don't have a perfect translation for," she said. "The closest I can get in English is, 'We have been waiting a long time to find you.'" Vasquez, standing in the back of the comms bay, made a sound that was not a word. John monitored the ship and watched Okafor work and thought about the shape of the last 41 days. The prime numbers at 3:49 in the morning. The word moving when Okafor had said the source was moving. The first response and the 44-minute wait and the feeling of the timer not running fast enough. The 4 atmospheric zones. The biology layer. Okafor at 2 in the morning with a notebook she was not writing in. The image on the display that was unmistakably a made thing. The greeting. "We have been waiting a long time to find you." He thought about what it meant that the curriculum had been waiting too, in a sense. The curriculum was not something that had been built for the Orion specifically. It had been built, refined over what he now believed was a very long time, for whatever came next, for whatever single-species vessel happened to be in the path of the approach. The curriculum was patient in the way that only things prepared for indefinite waiting were patient. At 2100 hours, John took his first walk of the evening, a circuit of the ship that he had made every night for 252 days, checking the things he checked and listening to the sounds the ship made and feeling the particular quality of its operational normalcy that he had spent 11 months learning. Everything was nominal. The systems were doing what the systems were supposed to do. The ship was healthy. He stopped at the observation port in the common room, which gave the widest view of the stellar field, and looked at the point of light that was brighter than the others and moving. Dr. Mbeki was already at the port. She was a quiet woman who had said less than most during the contact period, not from disengagement, but from a kind of internal processing that John had come to recognize as her specific mode. She was looking at the point of light with an expression he could not fully read. "I keep thinking about my graduate supervisor," she said without looking at him. She spent 40 years studying extremophile biology, organisms that survived in conditions considered incompatible with life. She always said the lesson of extremophiles was that life was not fragile, it was opportunistic. It would find a way to exist wherever the physics allowed it. She died 6 years ago. She paused. I keep thinking about what she would say if she could see the third biological profile. The methane environment one. Torres said it works in conditions she wouldn't have recognized as biological. My supervisor would have said that was the most important biology lesson in the history of the discipline, and she would have been right. John looked at the point of light. We'll tell people about her, he said. When we get back, we'll make sure her name is in the account of this. Mbeki looked at him then. Thank you, she said simply. The last thing he looked at before his sleep block was the exchange log, the full record of everything sent and received since the first response on day 31. It was already long, and it was growing with every cycle. He thought about the greeting. The distance that is no longer between us. We have been waiting a long time to find you. He thought about the before and the after, the 1 and the 4, the sequence they had been shown. He thought about the Orion's marker in the before position, and what it would mean if the sequence was not just a description of the past, but an indication of a possible future, and what that future would look like from the vantage point of 200 years, or 500 years, or 1,000 years from now. He was not frightened of this, he found. He had been alert and careful and professionally cautious throughout, as the work required, and he remained so. But he was not frightened. What he felt, sitting in the comms bay at the end of day 41 with the exchange running on the display and the point of light holding its position outside, was something that he thought he would spend the rest of his life trying to find adequate words for. It was the feeling of a door that had always been there that you had not known was a door, opening. And on the other side, patient and experienced and carrying 4 kinds of life and the memory of being one. Something that had come a very long way to knock.
This has been the Midnight Frequency. The studio goes dark now. Sleep well.